Hello, come in. Hi, nice to see you. Ah, so I'm standing again here. I come over to this shelf and have a look at tending the books. You may remember this particular section isn't really by subject or category or author, but it's really books that have a particular value for me. They're precious because of personal family associations or just because they've got the most wonderful bindings and editions. Anyway, the other day we did the sort of fishing with Ted Hughes things, and I read you those modern poems about fish and fishing, the pike poem and the lovely poem that morning about the sort of moment of epiphany in the river with the salmon. But of course, the sort of granddaddy of all beautiful writing about fishing is Isaac Walton, who wrote The Compleat Angler. And I want to show you this book. There are lots of different lovely editions of The Compleat Angler. This, as you'll see, is The Compleat Walton. It's not just Isaac Walton's famous fishing book, but it also has his lives of some of the sort of metaphysical poets. It's got his Life of John Donne and his Life of George Herbert, both of whom, as you know, are really important to me. Anyway, let me show you. It's just the most beautiful leather binding. The gold, the Compleat Warning, and this lovely IW for Isaac Walton. And look at this marbled paper. This is just exquisite. This is another of those lovely books that belonged to Maggie's father. He was something of a bibliophile, and he was often given beautiful books for prizes when he was at Eton and Cambridge. So it's just glorious to have this. It has that lovely thing. Just show you. I love it the way they put this tracing paper in, and then there's an exquisite engraving of Isaac Walton. And Isaac Walton, The Compleat Angler, Lives of Donne, Wootton, Hooker, Herbert and Sanderson, with Love and Truth, Miscellaneous Writings. It's the Nonesuch Press, Bloomsbury. This one was printed in 1929, but it's a superb edition. You can see this lovely handmade paper and hand cut. You see the sort of rough edges of that. And for The Compleat Angler, it has the lovely, beautiful illustrations of all the fish and so on. So anyway, I thought I'd just read you. Have a seat. I thought I'd just read you a couple of passages, both from the Angler, but also from the Life of Herbert, because I've read you Herbert poems before, and I'll read you some more on future occasions. As you know, Herbert's really important to me. Now, The Compleat Angler, as you may remember, is really framed as a sort of conversation between three men who happen to meet walking towards an inn, one of whom is a hunter, one of whom is a hawker, and one of whom is a fisher. And of course, Isaac Walton writes the parts for all of them, but Isaac is the fisherman, and he makes it first a great defence of fishing as a pastime, and also a reflection on how to do it. And it starts with each of them talking about the element of the four elements, earth, air, water and fire, that is the element of their pastime. So there's a wonderful encomium of the air, by the hawker and so on. So I'll just read you the few phrases, first of all, in which Walton praises water itself, very much as Hughes does in that long poetic sequence, The River. And now for the water, the element that I trade in. The water is the eldest daughter of the creation, the element upon which the Spirit of God did first move, the element which God commanded to bring forth living creatures abundantly, and without which those that inhabit the land, even all creatures that have breath in their nostrils, must suddenly return to putrefaction. Moses, the great lawgiver and chief philosopher, skilled in all the learning of the Egyptians, who was called the friend of God and knew the mind of the Almighty, names this element the first in the creation. This is the element upon which the Spirit of God did first move, and is the chief ingredient of the creation. Many philosophers have made it to comprehend all the other elements, but most allow it the chiefest in the mixture of all living creatures. And he's reflecting on the understanding of his day, but he was right then, and it's still true now, that most of the earth is composed, in fact, of water and oceans, and most of what we are, I forget what it is, it's something like 90%, liquid, and water is what we are. We are all born and flowing out of that water. And then he goes on to talk about how the water creates these, or enables all the beautiful things that grow alongside it. There's a great encomium of a willow. Then he gets on to the subject of angling, of actually fishing. And there's a great passage which I'm sure Hughes must have known and loved, and which I certainly know and love, in which he compares the art of angling with the art of poetry. So he says this: "O sir, doubt not but that angling is an art, and an art worth your learning. The question is rather whether you be capable of learning it. For angling is somewhat like poetry. Men are to be born so, I mean with the inclinations to it, though both may be heightened by practice and experience. But he that hopes to be a good angler must not only bring an inquiring, searching, observing wit, but must also bring a large measure of hope and patience." Oh, tell me about it. My few experiences of angling is mainly hope and patience, and a love and propensity to the art itself. But having once got and practised it, then doubt not but angling will prove to be so pleasant that it will prove like virtue, a reward to itself. Every fisherman will tell you it's actually the fishing rather than the catching that's the real joy of it. But I read this as a poet, and I see his list of things, the idea of being born to it, but then practice, experience, hope, patience, searching, inquiring, observing, wit. All of those things are a pretty good checklist for anybody who wants to write poetry. And then he goes on to say that really what's going on when you're angling, you appear to be doing something like fishing. Actually, you're sitting very still and contemplating the beauties of the water. And so there's a kind of element of contemplation in it. He says that in this, or that contemplation and praise meet together, he says, and do most properly belong to the most honest, ingenious, quiet, and harmless art of angling. And first I should tell you what some have observed, and I have found it to be a real truth, that the very sitting by the river's side is not only the quietest and fittest place for contemplation, but will invite an angler to do it. And this seems to be maintained by the learned Pietro de Meline, who observes that when God intended to reveal any future events or high notions to the prophets, he carried them either to the deserts or to the seashore, and having so separated them from amidst the press of people and business and the cares of the world, he might settle their minds in a quiet repose and make them fit for revelation. That's just superb. And those are all passages. The Compleat Angler is read and treasured by many people who never go fishing in their lives. And it's for passages that light, that sense of quietness and contemplation is wonderful. Anyway, let me also just have a sip of the coffee here. Just to give you, the Compleat Angler is his best known work, but I think his Life of Herbert is also magnificent and beautiful. And I'd just love to read you a little passage he wrote about Herbert's love of music. I think music and poetry go together, and this is one of the finest passages, I think, in the thing. And then it's followed by just a short anecdote about what happened one day when Herbert was on his way from Bemerton, the little village where he was vicar, to Salisbury, where he was going to make music with his friends. So here's the thing about Herbert and music generally. His chiefest recreation was music, in which heavenly art he was a most excellent master, and did himself compose many divine hymns and anthems, which he set and sung to his lute or viol. And though he was a lover of retiredness, yet his love to music was such that he went usually twice a week on certain appointed days to the cathedral church in Salisbury, and at his return would say that his time spent in prayer and cathedral music elevated his soul and was his heaven upon earth. But before his return thence to Bemerton, He would usually sing and play his part at an appointed private music meeting, and to justify this practice he would often say, and this is a beautiful saying, "Religion does not banish mirth, but only moderates and sets rules to it." And as his desire to enjoy his heaven upon earth drew him twice every week to Salisbury, so his walks thither were the occasion of many happy accidents to others, of which I will mention some few. And he then goes on to talk about how he met various people and helped them out. And there's a wonderful story about how he met a man whose horse had gone astray. This is the story. In another walk to Salisbury, he saw a poor man with a poorer horse that was fallen under his load. They were both in distress and needed present help, which Mr. Herbert, perceiving, put off his canonical coat and helped the poor man to unload and after to load his horse. The poor man blessed him for it, and he blessed the poor man, and was so like the Good Samaritan that he gave him money to refresh both himself and his horse. And he told him, quote, that if he loved himself, he should be merciful to his beast. So there's compassion for the horse as well, something good for the man and good for the horse. Thus he left the poor man, and at his coming to his musical friends at Salisbury, they began to wonder that Mr. George Herbert, which used to be so trim and clean, came into that company so soiled and discomposed. But he told them the occasion. And when one of the company told him he had disparaged himself by so dirty an employment, his answer was that the thought of what he had done would prove music to him at midnight. And of course, John Drury, in his beautiful biography of Herbert, took that phrase, music at midnight, and made it the title of his book. I love that idea that he loved music, but that he also saw that in the act of charity, in the helping, in the remembrance that you'd done a good deed, would also be a kind of music at midnight. And I love the way that Herbert, who was a very dapper, genteel man and rather a natty dresser, was not in the least worried about getting himself completely clotted up with mud. If he could help someone. He goes on after the music at midnight to say, and that the omission of that would have upbraided him and made discord in his conscience, wheresoever he passed by that place. If I be bound to pray for all that be in distress, Herbert said, I'm sure that I am bound, so far as it is in my power, to practice what I pray for. And though I do not wish for the like occasion every day, yet let me tell you, I would not willingly pass by one day of my life without comforting a sad soul or showing mercy. And I praise God for this occasion. And now, let's tune our instruments. A brilliant ending to the story. And of course, there's a sense in which that way of living, that practical, charitable, responsive, generous way of living that had led Herbert to provide some money for the refreshment of both the man and the horse, was precisely tuning the instrument. His great friend John Donne, whom Walton also writes the Life of, referred to the whole of life as getting ready for the great concert of heaven. And he says, since I am coming to that holy room where with thy choir of saints forevermore, I shall be made thy music. I tune my instrument here at the door. As you can see, looking around my room, I've got a few musical instruments. This lovely archtop guitar I played for you, and the mandolin, and the other guitar, and the harp. And I feel a great sense of connection and fraternity with George Herbert. Like him, I'm a poet, priest in the Church of England, and like him, I sometimes set my poems to music. Anyway, I thought you'd enjoy seeing that book, and it's great to see you again. Thanks for dropping by.